If China agrees and say, you know what? Reciprocal tariff 0. We're not going to put any on you, you put nothing on us. If that was to be agreed upon, who loses more and who wins more?
Actually, that is the best scenario, and that's where actually the standard international trade theory has a bit of a point. Unusually, I'm usually quite critical of mainstream economics, but that's the one point where they're perhaps slightly stronger. Everyone would win. Because you see, tariffs, the reason is the following. Trade is really the source of wealth creation for everyone. Trade, whether it's internal trade or external trade. But actually, when you then have the country divisions and you look at how countries are doing compared to each other, you will see that international trade is the main source of wealth creation between countries. So trade is extremely valuable. Now, most economists very simplistically follow from that you should never have tariffs, not even unilateral tariffs, not even if the other guys have lots of tariffs against you, you should not respond by putting tariffs on. It's always better not to have tariffs. That's the official mainstream economics response, and they're very clear-cut about this. That's not entirely true, and therefore, to some extent, President Trump has a bit of a point, namely, tariffs have proven in history to be extremely successful and in fact necessary when you are a developing economy that wants to move up to the next level and you want to raise the level of value added of your entire domestic economy. The principle to be successful as an economy is through international trade, and you have to follow the rule of mainly importing raw materials, that means low value added goods. Then you do the adding of value and you export high value added goods. And the US is very good with certain high value added goods, and services are included, of course, particularly the services. US is very good. And there's, high value, whether it's software, technology related, and telecommunications and IT and so on. That's the principle. That applies throughout history to all countries at all time periods. And that's where tariffs can be very useful if you want to move up to the next level. And you put on tariffs such that you enhance that pattern of, basically you want to get raw materials very cheaply. So you'd never put tariffs on raw materials that you're importing, import tariffs, you'd never have that, and on raw materials. But of course, if the other country is mainly exporting finished goods that you are also trying to, manufacture yourself, or services, they're offering services that you are trying to offer, that's where the tariffs make sense. If behind this tariff wall, if you want, or tariff protection, it's only a partial protection because you're not banning those, it's just getting slightly more expensive depending on the percentage. If you, behind this protection, you make sure that industry and your domestic players are actually stepping up to the plate and are getting ready, because in the future you want to take this off and then let them roam freely and let the foreign things come in freely. And that pressure has to be there. And then it can be extremely successful. That's how Japan was in the 20th century, the country that had the most dramatic economic development, only overtaken towards the end of the 20th century and then beginning of 21st by China. Although if you take the whole country, because it's huge and rural areas, some are still not so developed. It's a bit of a mixed batch, but big chunks of China did beat Japan on in that respect. But they all followed the same pattern. And it's also true if you go further back in history, German economic development in the 19th century, the US development in the 19th century, overtaking number one economic power, Britain, happened with the same pattern, namely very selective tariffs. So that this trade pattern was encouraged where you get your raw material imports cheaply, and you have development of your domestic high value added goods and service industry, and you then encourage the exports. And so usually it's a combination of tariffs and subsidies to work on that pattern. But it's only justified because it is a government intervention. That's quite clear. This is a government intervention, tariffs, and normally a free market is preferred. But if you do it cleverly, you combine this intervention with incentives for the private sector to step up to the plate and deliver, shift to the higher level manufacturing or service sector value-added activities, then it's extremely successful and has been in history consistently. That's how the US overtook Britain.
Yeah, but the question for me, okay, so who's the biggest loser? So while you're speaking, I'm trying to see what ChatGPT is going to tell me the biggest winners and losers are if they agree to 0% tariffs. Rob, if you're going to pull this up and ask the question, who are the biggest winners and losers if the tariff on China and US goes to zero? Reciprocal tariffs goes to zero. Who are the biggest winners and losers? Here's what it says. Winners, big US retailers. Walmart, Target, Amazon would benefit from lower import costs. Consumers would see cheaper goods. Electronics, clothing, furniture, toys. Lower prices equals lower inflation, more purchasing power if they go to 0% tariffs. U.S. tech companies, Apple, Tesla, HP, which manufacture heavily in China, would save on costs and avoid supply chain friction.
Yep.
Tech imports like Qualcomm, NVIDIA would expand access to Chinese markets. Okay. I just saw a story about how much an iPhone will be right now based on what it's going to cost. Rob, if you want to pull that story up. This is from 5 days ago.
I saw that it would be quite a bit. Yeah, $3,000 is what I saw.
$3,000 is what I saw. I saw 3,000. So this one's saying 23.
Well,
I think it's 3,000 for the one with bigger. If you go a little bit lower, Rob, it'll tell you. Let's go a little bit lower in the story. It says all the way up to 3,000, I think. $2,300, 43% increase with what's going on with tariffs. Okay, so that's that. Let me continue. Chinese manufacturers and exporters. With U.S. tariffs gone, Chinese firms in electronics, machinery, textiles regain full access to U.S. markets because it's cheaper to get exports. Increases China's export momentum. Okay, next. U.S.-Chinese logistics and shipping firms. Global financial markets. Wall Street would rally on improved U.S.-China relations, reduce geopolitical risk, investor optimism. 6, South Asian and global suppliers. These are all great winners. Now let's look at losers. U.S. domestic manufacturers, steel, aluminum, textile, furniture.
Yeah.
So that means jobs still going to go over there because it's going to be cheaper labor there. China substitutes. Vietnam, Mexico, India. These countries benefited from U.S.-China decoupling, the trade war. So a lot of us started sending business to Vietnam, Mexico, India. They would take it. So they may not want reciprocal tariffs with U.S. and China. U.S. labor unions, which I don't understand these guys. These are the protectionist policymakers. Unions will likely see a betrayal of bring jobs home, okay, to bring the jobs here. Okay, fine. U.S. defense hawks and China skeptics. Companies that relocated from China during trade war. Domestic industries. These are saying who the losers are. For you, I see more positive on doing reciprocal than not doing it. Why isn't China agreeing to do it?
I think we do have a political element here. And that is, on both sides. We saw it in the message from President Trump. It was the second or third word of his message, disrespectful. And the Chinese have the same attitude. They feel what President Trump's been doing is being very disrespectful. So we do have, it's like between humans, we're sort of, this has not been a nice way of doing it. We're slightly miffed now and we're going to, we don't want to be pushed around. So there is that element. But in principle, if you have no tariffs on either side, basically each country still has to think, is this a healthy relationship? And there's this long history, and we're just, President Trump is being quite focused on this and willing to have a dramatic policy change, because until now, all the presidents didn't touch this, and they let the State Department and all the trade negotiators work in line with standard trade, orthodox economics. And so there really hasn't been much of an dramatic policy change. But the end result has been essentially, previous administrations overseeing the transfer of labor of U.S. jobs to China. And that's really essentially also been U.S. policy. And so the U.S. policy has helped in making China very strong, because all the U.S. companies were more or less encouraged, yeah, that's fine, you do that. The environment was like that. And so President Trump is unusual because he doesn't care about all this economic orthodoxy. He just sees the jobs going and he wants to reverse it. He sees and has seen since the 80s, as we saw from that old interview, that there isn't really quite a level playing field when it comes to tariffs. And he just thinks, hey, let's change that. But in my view, there's a slight missing element, and that is one needs to combine that with a policy that sets the right incentives, not to dictate to anyone at all, no, but to create the incentive structure for the private sector in the US such that you will have still boosted high value added activities expanded in the US. You want to keep that. You want to offshore essentially low value added activities. That doesn't, that's not the big problem. And I think where do you draw a line is the question. And I think it's been drawn at too high a level, so that the US has been quite, successful in the IT sector and in software and things like that. But too much of the manufacturing has been offshored, and that's where President Trump has a point. But is this going to change? Is it going to be reversed just through tariff policy and perhaps even this agreement? If you do this agreement 0-0, then it's not going to change, actually.
You don't think 0-0 is going to make any difference?
On this point, that really you'd like to have more jobs in the higher value-added manufacturing sector in the U.S.
doesn't create the more jobs here, so it doesn't solve for that.
Exactly.
Nowadays, more than ever, the brand you wear reflects and represents who you are. So for us, if you wear a Future Looks Bright hat or a Valuetainment gear, you're telling the world, I'm optimistic, I'm excited about what's going to be happening, but you're a free thinker, you question things, you like debate. And by the way, last year, 120,000 people got a piece of Future Looks Bright gear with Valuetainment. We have so many new things. The cufflinks are here. New Future Looks Bright. This is my favorite, the green one. Just yesterday, somebody placed an order for 100 of these. If you watch the PBD podcast, you got a bunch to choose from. White ones, black ones. If you smoke cigars and you come to our cigar lounge, we have this high quality lighter cutter and a holder for the cigars. We got sweaters with the Valuetainment logo on it. We got mugs. We got a bunch of different things. But if you believe the future looks bright, if you follow our content and what we represent with Valuetainment, with PBD Podcast, go to vtmerch.com. And by the way, if you order right now, there's going to be a special VT gift inside just for you. So again, go to vtmerch.com, place your order, tell the world that you believe the future looks bright. If you enjoyed this video, you want to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click here.